The next presentation is by a company that has created a brand new approach to data and understanding audiences over the next couple of years. But to tell you more about it, would you welcome Courtney Williams from Parrot Analytics.
Hello. So this is exciting. We've had a morning of drama and learning about what's happening in drama and hearing from people who make things, beautiful things. We've already had some data, so I thought I would take it from there and sort of see where we intersect. In a business that focuses on engagement and reaching people, and as much as we all really identify with, I think, the creative process that we're involved in at one level or another, at the end of the day, we still need people to pay for it. And how do we get people to pay for it? Well, we get people to pay for it by, at the end of the day, being able to sell something to someone somewhere, either a subscription or a toothpaste or whatever it might be. And as part of that, we come to a basic question. What do people want? What do people want to watch? What do they want to consume? What do they want to talk about? Our business today is very different from when I started 20-some years ago, in that it is a much more conversational experience. But that conversation doesn't just happen at the water cooler in the office. That conversation happens across countries, across continents, all over the world. As a result, we can now, A, learn more and more about what people do want and what they are watching, what they are engaging with, but we also have to figure out how to reach them and how to make things for them. 90% of the world's data has been accumulated in the last 2 years, and it is believed that over the next 2 years, we will accumulate the next 90% of the world's data, which means that we're moving faster and faster and faster as a world into a place where data and numbers are driving things we're doing. That doesn't mean that AI is going to make all of our content. It just means that we can now actually understand at various levels what we want to make and why. Yet for broadcast television, we still stick to this idea of focus groups and panel-based metrics and all of that kind of stuff that hasn't changed since sort of broadcast television began. In a $500 billion industry that we work in, does that seem like we are actually starting from the right place? Does it seem that we can do more? Obviously, I think so. And so that's where we start from. Parrot. Why? Well, we are focused on television. We always have been. We're a group of people who are incredibly passionate and love television, right? That's where it started from. Content, enjoying content, wanting to partake and share and believe in content. We wanted to be behind it. We wanted to understand it better. So if we're going to do that, what do? Well, we need to measure something. We need to understand what people are watching and where and why and how. And so quickly, the answer of looking at that is capture the world's largest data sets, right? The internet accessible universe across the world. It's already nearly 4 billion people, and it's growing all the time. Then you clean those data sets, you put them all together, you enrich them. We use proprietary patented AI systems and algorithms, et cetera, that we put together. And then we provide a metric, one benchmark across the world. All of that, though, is done, as Paul had talked about before, all of that is done based on this idea that our industry is very different from any other industry, right? We don't make toothpaste. We make something where every individual piece of it, everything everybody in this room is working on, has an individual connection to an individual person. And that individual person can be connected to the cast or the music or the script or the IP. Is it a remake? Is it a reboot? Handmaid's Tale was a book. It was already a movie, right? That's not a new story. How does that factor in? And then where do you go from there? So this is what we're already talking about looking at as we move out. So that's all great. It's a brief history of what we do and how we do it. But now let's look at what actually matters to you all, right? What's working? What's not working? These are the top titles year to date in Europe, right? So you've got Walking Dead and Vikings and all of these shows, but then as you move down, you've got Shameless and Riverdale. We can look at them just in Spain. So this is what's happening in Spain. Top 2, Game of Thrones, Casa de Papel. So you can see a lot of them are Spanish. So that's a good thing. In Spain, I guess, it doesn't suggest that only US content or the big productions and the big SVOD productions are winning. But we can also look at it on genres, right? The types of shows. In this case, these are period dramas, right? Specifically set into times, whether they're Narcos or Halt and Catch Fire or whatever it might be. But then we can also look at it across the genre, right? So how's the genre moving? How's that moving forward? What's that driving? So then we said, okay, well, for today's effort and what we're thinking about today, how does that relate to what everybody in the room wants to hear, right? What's making a difference? What's changing? What's working? What's not working? We can track what we've already paid for and what we've already got on air. That's important. But we've already paid for it. We're already broadcasting it. What can we start to look at based on historical analysis to be able to understand what's moving forward, right? What types, what things, what genres, whatever it might be that we're looking at moving forward. Can we start to contextualize this question that we heard at the beginning of the day in terms of, do we take advantage of the current situation? Do we make distracting television? Do we make life-changing television? What are the differences? So what we looked at for today is the difference between what we consider evergreen versus zeitgeist content. So zeitgeist content would be things of the moment, right? Something perhaps like Roseanne, or in this case, Dark. Something that is all about what's going on now. Well, what do we see with that? Well, we see that that performs really very well for a short period of time, right? So the demand being expressed for that happened primarily over a 2-month period. Okay, how about evergreen content? So what's evergreen content? Those are the shows, generally in later seasons or no longer airing, that are great series, that constantly drag out new viewers, right? Are regularly engaging with people. So this is Breaking Bad, right? Breaking Bad hasn't been on air for 5 years, and yet it consistently registers a high level of demand being expressed for it. Now let's compare the two of them against each other. So this is the last 12 months in Europe for Dark versus Breaking Bad, or as I was saying, Zeitgeist versus Evergreen. These, and as a context, because context is important, both of these shows have performed extremely well, right? They're above average performance. So you can see now, when you're looking at it, what does that mean? What's the benefit? What's the downside, pros and cons? Pros for Zeitgeist content, right? You can pick up new viewers. They were great frequently on VOD and sort of non-linear platforms. The cons with them, the demand tends to be inconsistent. It's not a global above average. And the volume, you have to make a lot of them to keep people interested. Evergreen is kind of the opposite end of the scale, right? There's consistent demand, there's built-in fan bases, there's frequently lots of the episodes, so you've got volume. But you don't always have the same kind of potential promotion because it's not of the now. It's not driving a really active conversation in the heartbeat. So then we said, well, can you figure out maybe what makes an evergreen? Can you start to understand what are the sort of traits or telltales for what is going to be evergreen content? Well, a show that builds over its life, right? That starts out and starts trending up and trends up continuously, and then as it comes down from the sort of finale, it still maintains a relatively high demand. That's one sign. Another sign, what happens in the off season? So again, this is a place where Today's world allows us such a completely different perspective than we used to have, which is now we can track content and what's happening and what people are doing with the content, even when it is not airing. So we can now see, this is Outlander, this is between end of season 3 and beginning of season 4. We can see that during that period, it continued to build. This suggests that as season 4 premieres, you've already got pent-up demand that you've been building. And now we can track what that is. We can start to look at it and see how that plays out. Now, great, so that's here in Europe, but what makes these things? What else can we look at? What can we sort of track to see that works for the things that people are trying to work on at the development stage or the production stage or the packaging stage, right? So looking at travelability, looking at how one show performs by comparison to its home market and what that means and how you can start to use that to identify, again, directionally predictive analysis. You can look at top 5 UK dramas in 2008. This is Sherlock. Sherlock actually had higher demand in some markets outside of the UK than it did in the UK. So in terms of its performance, it performed incredibly well in the UK, and demand being expressed for it, but it actually performed even better in the US or Ukraine or Russia. Driving down into each one, again, of these individual sort of factors in the DNA and the genome of a piece of content and looking at, okay, language. How does language impact it? Well, if we look at top markets for content originating in France, not surprisingly, most of them are French-speaking markets, right? But within that, we can start to understand which ones move most similarly and delve down, and we can look at, as an industry, we can now begin to look at what types of contents and what genres of contents, right? Looking at cast. If you cast a show that you produce in France in French, but maybe you have a foreign talent and you're promoting the foreign talent. Maybe in this world of now everybody loves subtitles on TV, that will have a big play. Right? So we can start to identify these things. We can see, looking at source material. Nothing is better in terms of what we look at. And as much as we would hesitate to say data should drive creative decisions, because it really shouldn't, but when you have original sort of data source material, when you know what happened in a book, you know what the market was for the book, or there was already a movie, or it's a reboot, right? We now have benchmarks from which we can judge what we believe the sort of contextual performance of something will be. And we should use that. Looking at subgenres, right? So here we decided to look at, and thankfully Paul talked a little bit about it earlier, the movement in terms of procedurals versus legal dramas. Two completely different things. In Europe, and the divergence between what people like versus they don't like, right? So in this case, in Austria, there's a lower differential between the demand expressed for procedurals and legal shows, which would suggest to me that if you're going to make a legal show in Austria, it will perform better in Austria than it might necessarily in Germany. And there you go. So in sort of closing as we're looking at it, and I think it's been an interesting morning already, as we move forward as an industry and as we begin to try and identify what we're doing and how we're doing it and how we're accumulating and making use of our data, we need to look at two things. We need to look at the context in which we're using it, and we need to look at the hypothesis behind why we're using it. What I mean by that is there is never going to be a moment where data is going to surface what a commissioning executive should do this morning, right? I don't believe we're going to show up and you turn on your computer and it'll say, today you need to make X. What it can do, and what we are working to help people do, is to identify based on the prevalence of data, whether it's ours or anybody else's, right? We have 4 trillion data points on access to us. We add 40 gigabytes of data to our servers every day. But more importantly, we know the context, we know the hypothesis, we know what we're trying to understand as a business and how we're trying to make that crossover fit between the two so that we all make better informed decisions. We all make decisions that allow people to continue to make the risky, the cutting edge, the really truly emotional and heartfelt or political or whatever it might be content, but also to make the content that reaches the most number of people in the broadest way that allows us all to continue to finance these things as we move forward. So that's it.
Thank you. Come and join me. Looking at things through a data lens, what have been the things that have most surprised you over the last couple of years? Did you ever sort of have a sort of a penicillin moment and discover something that you weren't expecting, or that said something new about the drama business?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things. I think for a lot of people in the room, and certainly from my perspective, you've been doing it long enough, they're gut feelings that this reinforces, right? And so now you can actually say, oh, well, I really believe that, but I can put some metrics behind it. And then there are those things, exactly to your point, that, wow, never expected that. And so sometimes it's things like the performance of sacred games in markets outside of India, or the speed with which something like Stranger Things became a phenomenon. Right?
What was that based on, according to the data?
So a lot of it is based on, look, there's 2 things that we also look at as a business. So we track an enormous amount of the peer-to-peer movement. And one of the things that I remember 20-some years ago was that we dictated the distribution windows as an industry, right? So we launched a show in the US, and then it went to the UK and Australia. And then today, somebody in Scandinavia can produce something for a small OTT player, and tomorrow afternoon it is available and trending in Chile on a peer-to-peer system. Most of what we see by movement and the speed with which things move is based on the speed with which people access shows in a peer-to-peer environment, which tends to be much faster, much more diverse, much broader. You know, with that, we've seen, and our partners have laid out, the sort of peer-to-peer environment is not limited to people under the age of 20. And it moves and people discover it, and we have a complexity in our business as we continue to window and move things out there more and more of how do people find the shows they want and watch them when and how they want to watch them.
So in the previous panel, we talked about the arrival of content on Facebook, which is the first social network really to carry content. YouTube's, I think, a different experience. It's not so much about the community. In your experience, coming from a data perspective, will that change the way shows reach audiences and their opportunity to develop or not?
I think without a doubt. I don't know if Facebook necessarily will be that play.
What will be?
You know, I hesitate to jump in there and say that, but I think certainly that dynamic, and Facebook has got a great shot at it and lots of smart people over there. I think that dynamic and that capacity to reach people that quickly will make the play. I think, you know, and they talked about it on the panel, right? Are we making content specifically for Snap or Facebook? Or are we simply viewing them as new platforms from which to share our existing stories, right? In the sense that whether we're passing stories down around a campfire or putting them on in, you know, a stadium or whatever it might be, a small theater or a book or whatever, Is Facebook simply a new platform for that?
So how much more important to the how should a show be gauged in terms of its success? Through television rating systems or through social media data?
So I think that's the thing that in the last 10 years has changed the most in my mind, is that for the first time, in talking to people in LA, et cetera, for the first time, we're changing the way we define a hit and the way we define something that's successful. And I think that's a place where we, as Parrot, spend a lot of time trying to understand. If you're making a show for broadcast television, then your GRPs, your barb ratings, that's it, right? That's what matters. That's what you're selling your ads on. If you're making a show to reach out there and to engage with people and to drive and to have instant access to the global world, maybe it is social media.
We'll see.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that's the exciting thing. It's the challenge. It's the exciting thing. It's where everybody is here. I do agree that fundamentally you have to continue to make good stories.
Sure.
But those are different, right? They can be memes or whatever else.
Sure. I wonder if there's a question anywhere. Has everybody warmed up a bit? And if there is one, can you just put the lights up and see if anyone does have a question? And if you do, raise your hand. Can't see a hand.
Everybody completely agrees with everything I said. I love it.
Question in the room. If you could get a microphone down to this gentleman. Can you tell us who you are and where you come from, please?
Hi, my name is Keith Wright, and I'm from New York City. I was wondering, how many unique metrics does Parrot develop from the data that you're sourcing?
We only develop one. There's only one metric with which we call the demand expression. And that's the one that we use. It's weighted and ranked on a sort of global basis. And part of the reason it's weighted and ranked and we clean it up and we use the AI for all that and some machine learning is that while capturing every engagement, they're not all equal to us as an industry. Something that appears in 20 million different feeds doesn't have the same value to us as an engagement as the 10 or 12,000 authors of whatever that piece was. But now, as a business and as what we do, we delve deeply into each one of the underlying data sets and all of that. But we surface only one metric. That's the kind of the point is you have one that's cross-platform, cross-globe, cross-whatever, just one number to build the context in the indexing.
Cool. Well, Courtney, that's been really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.